Hello, my name is Eric Freeland. I'm here to do a lesson on density altitude. This is for my Liberty University Aviation 410 class, spring term 2021. Our objective is to define what density altitude is and why it's important, and also how to find density altitude. So we'll look into that. So what is density altitude? Well, density altitude is defined as the pressure altitude that's corrected for non-standard temperature. The way that you would find your pressure altitude, just real quickly, if you're in the plane, is to just put 29.92 into the altimeter settings, and that'll read what your pressure altitude's at for that airport, wherever you're at. So let's look into what does temperature do. Temperature will change your density altitude. The way it does this is the hotter the air is, the less dense it will become. So you can look at it from the standpoint of the hotter that the air is around you, those air molecules, they separate, and once they separate, there is not as much air inside that small space that would be there if it's colder. When that air is colder, everything begins to, the air molecules will come closer and shrink together. Therefore, you have the density of that air in the small area is a lot more dense. There's more air molecules there. So that's how our temperature will change our density altitude. Another big thing is what else can affect density altitude. That's going to be our humidity. Humidity works as, especially down here, you've got high heat, so that's separating those air molecules, and then you're talking about, sometimes 100% humidity on those hot days. So there is the air is just saturated with water molecules. Basically, is what that does. It takes up even more space of that small group of air, which is going to increase your density altitude because there's, yet again, like the separation from the temperature. Now there's this big separation, and then more molecules are getting put into it from the water, which is wanting to spread even further. So that's just jacking your density altitude way up. So now we go into finding our density altitude. There's two different ways you can find it. One is the E6B calculator. Basically, what you'll do is you'll just plug in your pressure altitude, and then you'll put it on where the temperature is outside, and then you'll read the window for the density altitude, and that's what your density altitude will be at for that pressure altitude and temperature setting. The second way is you can use a mathematical formula. It's going to be density altitude is equal to pressure altitude plus 120 times your outside air temperature minus your standard atmospheric temperature. So that's where your formulas come in to finding your density altitude. So what makes density altitude important to us, especially as commercial pilots? It affects your plane. It can change how well it performs or how bad it performs. If you're especially up there in like the Midwest, up around like Colorado area or whatever, and you've got, you're already at a super high altitude just on the ground, and it's a hot day out there with high humidity. It may be possible that you're, flying a 172 and the density altitude is too high. The plane thinks it's too high. It's above its service ceiling, and who knows, your plane may not even be able to leave the runway. Or if you can leave the runway, you may not be able to get high enough off the ground to avoid hitting the mountain. So all of this just really affects, your go, no-go decision and how you fly that plane. So with all that being said, there's a lot of resources out there. These are just two of the resources I use to, get some of this information to put together really quick for everybody. There's a lot out there to look into. So. And then lastly, we'll just go over what we're going to go through our objectives. We define what density altitude is. We know how to find it. and we understand why it's important to us as pilots and how much it can affect us and the plane. So you need to have a really good understanding of it before you start flying, especially in that high humidity, high temperature, type of flying conditions. The lower the density altitude is, the better your airplane's going to perform. So, more power to you. But you just have to really be cautious of the high humidity, high temperature, for your density altitude. So hopefully this got your brain stirring and you were able to learn a little bit about density altitude. Thanks.